thank you so much for joining us today. I'm super excited to be here with Deirdre Findlay, who is the CMO of Condé Nast. Ms. Findlay, thank you so much for joining us today. Super excited to hear your story. If this were a traditional workshop, we would have had her in person and had a fun activity and eaten some food, which I love to do. But during COVID, I think Zoom is the next best thing. We had over 50 girls from across the country actually register for this workshop. So we're all super excited to learn more about you. Could you start by just giving me an overview about your childhood? Where did you grow up and how did you get into marketing?
Absolutely. So thanks, Manette. I really appreciate you inviting me to join you guys. I'm thrilled to be here. So I grew up in New York City. I am the one of two daughters of immigrant parents. Both my parents are from Jamaica. So first generation American. I was born in New York City, lived there until right before high school. And then I moved to Princeton Junction, New Jersey, where I went to high school. And then from there, I left New Jersey and went to Williams College in Massachusetts, and then eventually got an MBA at Dartmouth in New Hampshire. And so that's my journey at a really high level. And then I got into marketing after business school. And so I started my career in finance, ironically enough, and was always very analytical. But what I realized is I missed that balance of creativity and analytics. And so I went to business school to try and figure out what was next. And that was ultimately what led me into marketing.
That's incredible. And what's your day-to-day job like now as CMO of Condé Nast?
Oh, that's such a hard question. There is no
There are a
consistent
lot
day.
going on, I'm sure.
There is a lot going on. And so just a little bit of background on Condé Nast. We're a global company. We started the Condé Nast started in publishing. So there are tons of magazines that you guys probably have heard of. We have over 30 publications, including Vogue, GQ, Wired, oh my gosh, The New Yorker, Glamour, Allure, and I could go on and on. So lots of different brands. We're in over 30 markets as well. And so it's fun being global, and we're published in 26 languages. So the
Wow.
complexity of the business is pretty great. My job is interesting because even though I have a traditional chief marketing officer title, I don't really have a traditional chief marketing officer role. And when most people think of marketing, they think of big campaigns to drive people to understand and be aware of your product and ultimately purchase your product or service. And yes, I do some of that. But the bigger part of my job, and actually what I was most excited about in coming to Condé Nast, is I'm also responsible for all of consumer revenue. And what that means is my team is also coming up with businesses that we can put out in the marketplace to take advantage of the great brands that I just mentioned. And so, for example, like Allure, which is a brand that's in our beauty space and is very well known and respected in beauty. We have the Allure Beauty Box business, where once a month, if you sign up for a subscription, we'll send you a box of beauty products. And there are other products like that that we are leaning into so that we can make money from the strength of our amazing brands. So a day in the life, there's no typical day in the life. Some days I'm getting ready for a board meeting and thinking about all the great work that my team has done and walking the board through that. Other days I'm really thinking about how do we fix maybe a business that isn't doing as well as we would like. So there are lots of different businesses that we're in. I gave you a couple examples. Some are doing really well, especially during COVID. Others are more challenging. If you think about our traditional newsstand business, which is the magazine business, a lot of people weren't going into stores. And so when you're not going into stores, that means that print magazine public sales went down. And so trying to think about creative ways to get our magazines in the hands of our end users.
And it seems like there's a lot of pivoting and creativity involved with this whole process that you're describing. So what do you do when you get stuck?
It's interesting. I like to put myself in the shoes of the consumer. At the end of the day, I think any good marketer is always focused on what the consumer wants and what the consumer needs. And I think if you remain focused on that, be it who is the consumer, what's their demographic, what do they like, what don't they like, how do they engage with your brands today, where do you see opportunities where they should be engaging with your brand. If you stay grounded in that, that's the best way to get unstuck, because the consumer, either through what they tell us directly or what we're able to understand about them based on how they engage with us and their relationship with us, they're giving us signals on what they want. And so it's our job to listen. And I think that's the best way to get unstuck.
And in listening, you're getting a lot of feedback from your users and your consumers. So how do you handle bad feedback? And when you work so hard on a brand campaign and it doesn't work out for you, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. So I think just like in work, as in personal situations, feedback is a gift. I had a manager tell me that years ago when I first started working, and it really stuck with me, because it's so easy to take feedback personally and dwell on it or don't agree with it. But at the end of the day, if someone's giving you feedback, it means they care enough to share that feedback, which is great. And they're vested in your success. And I think the same thing of our consumers. When our consumers are telling us that something's not working for them, they are caring enough to let us know that the brand is letting them down or they want more from the brand. And that's good. That means they're engaged and that they care. And so the best thing we can do is listen. And whenever I get feedback, I listen. Even if I don't believe the feedback, I also believe that perception is reality. So whether I think it's true or not, if other people think that it's true, that means I have work to do. And I need to think about how to pivot and what I can do to change that perception or that belief.
And how do you pivot? Because I know marketing is such a fast-paced thing. Trends are always changing. So how are you constantly coming up with new ideas?
Yeah, that's honestly the hardest part of the job. I try and I do a lot of reading, and I listen to a ton of podcasts. There are podcasts that I love by people that I really trust and respect. Scott Galloway, who's also a professor at NYU, is someone that I listen to a lot. He does a podcast with Kara Swisher, who was all things digital, and now she's associated with the New York Times. They do a podcast called Pivot. I listen to that. They publish twice a week, and I stay on top of a lot of the key trends that way. I have some amazing network of CMO friends or other friends who are running consumer businesses, and we talk regularly about what we're seeing in the marketplace and how we can do things differently given those trends. And then I think the key is sharing those insights, networking with the folks on my team to understand what they're seeing, and then putting plans in place to deliver against it. And so, one of the first things that I did when I came to Condé Nast was to create a strategic framework for how we want to think about the business. And it's specific enough so that everyone's really clear on what we're working towards. And so for us, it's about making sure that we drive as much consumer revenue for Condé Nast as possible. And how we do that is by leaning into our existing businesses that we've developed, like Allure Beauty Box, but then also making sure that we're thinking about brand new businesses that are scalable, could be global, could drive considerable revenue for the company. And with everyone anchored on that, we're constantly thinking about, okay, well, what are new ways for us to drive more revenue, extract more value? When we're not just thinking about revenue, we're also thinking about profit, because it doesn't matter how much money you make at the top line if you're not able to recognize the majority of that revenue to the bottom line so that you can invest it in new things.
And this obviously seems like a pretty big operation. So how do you sort of work with your team, and what role is collaboration playing in all of it?
Collaboration is absolutely critical. I'm a big believer in not just the what you do, but the how you do it. And we have very, very aggressive goals. Like, my team is responsible for really helping to shift the company into more of a digital first media company, which is definitely an evolution from our print based magazine roots. And you can't do that without being innovative, and innovation doesn't happen without collaboration. And so one of our big tenets, principles to how we drive change is thinking through what are all the things we need to do. And so number one is we need to optimize the things that we're currently doing today to make sure that we're keeping the basic engine of the business running. And I think my team does a great job of that. But where collaboration really comes in and is very necessary is when we're starting to do more of the innovation and thinking about net new things. Harder to do in our Zoom reality right now, but really important. And not just collaboration within marketing, but collaboration across the organization. Because we can't achieve our goals if we're not partnering well with the product team that's responsible for building the experiences that we ideate, partner with editorial. I mean, Condé Nast is all about content. And it's our editorial team that's coming up with the amazing content that Vogue is writing, or the amazing ideas that Vanity Fair is putting out there and reporting on what's happening in the world, be it politics to what's happening in Hollywood, Bon Appetit, and our amazing recipe content and videos that we're producing in that space. So collaborating with those teams as well to make sure that we're all in lockstep on what the future should be for the business.
I love that. My feedback for Bon Appetit is that they need to make some easier videos, because I try and always fail to follow those recipes.
I think they're hard too. Okay, I feel better now that you said that. I thought it was just me.
They're so hard. My brother and I have tried a few, and it never ends. It always ends with like Chinese takeout.
Well, I have a meeting with the editor-in-chief of Bon Appetit tomorrow, and I will give her your feedback.
I really loved hearing about this whole journey, about how you sort of got into marketing and now what you are working on with Condé Nast. But one of the things that really stuck with me is I was watching your video, and you said the phrase "I shouldn't be here" really dominated a big part of your life. I'm wondering, what was that like for you, and how did that phrase and sort of that mindset of not belonging impact your life?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I talked about growing up in New York, but what I didn't talk about was the fact that I went to private school in New York, where I was the only Black student for a long time. And then my sister came to the same school. And so there were two of us. And so I've been almost my entire life, from grade school through to today, one of a few in the room. And, you know, that definitely impacts you. When I was in grade school, people would say, oh, like, I don't have any Black friends. And you're like, maybe I'm not in the right school. Maybe I shouldn't be here. And then I realized, you know, I became friends with lots of people and I did really well in school, so I should be there. And so that was like hurdle number one. And then, you know, you move on and you go to high school, and there's like a whole new monologue of, is this the right place for me? Am I smart enough to be here? And at the end of the day, I kept proving that I should be there. I did really well in school, was, you know, had enough friends, and maybe not the most popular, but popular enough that I had a decent life in high school. And then you go on to college. And, you know, I went from being one of the top students in my high school to being in a college, Williams, where everyone is really smart. And so then you start thinking, well, am I smart enough to be here? And you know, I had a professor say to me, you really need to stop second guessing yourself, because I can tell when you're confident, because you show up differently in the classroom. Like, you participate, you raise your hand, I don't have to call on you. And the mere act of me being confident and raising my hand, proactively participating, makes the professor think about you differently. And ultimately, I did really well in the classes where I was more assertive and more confident. And that was an interesting lesson that I took with me to business school. You know, first year of business school, same thing. I kind of got in my head about like, oh my gosh, even smarter group of people. And by my second year, I just was really comfortable in my own skin. I knew how to study smarter, not always harder, but smarter. I was able to balance work with actually having a little bit more of a life. And I think that's really important. I learned how to play golf in business school, and I would take the time to play golf, and I would take the time to go out to dinner my second year with friends. And so I was working out again. I had stopped working out my first year. And so I just wasn't feeling like myself. And I learned that being very well balanced, figuring out a way to work smarter, not just work harder, but also to carve out time for me and to do some of the things that I enjoy actually made me a better person all around, which resulted in me being more confident and showing up with more confidence. But it's not to say that you don't get that, those words do show up again from time to time. They've showed up when I was at Google. I'd never worked really in a tech environment before. So even though I was a really good marketer, I was doing it in a different context. But what I figured out there was I could teach Google how to do marketing in a new and really thoughtful way while I was learning how to be more of a tech person. And so always think about, you and I were talking earlier about what your superpower is. And I've learned to think about, like, what is my superpower? Be very clear on what I'm bringing to the table while learning everything else. Like, I never would have taken this job at Condé Nast if I wasn't really clear on what my superpower was. I'd never worked in publishing before. I didn't know the ins and outs of the magazine business and how I should be thinking about, magazines within the context of creating these new digital businesses. But I knew direct to consumer marketing really well. I knew how to build subscription businesses coming out of Stitch Fix. I knew how to test and innovate and rapid prototype, which means getting things to market quickly from my experience in technology. There was so much that I brought to the table when I came to Condé Nast. And I did all of that while learning the publishing business. And so now I'm much more well-rounded and continue to be much more confident in my role here. And so I would love to tell you that you're never going to get that tinge of like, maybe I shouldn't be here. But the reality is, I think focusing on what you bring to the table and really leaning in there while, you learn some of the other things maybe that you don't know yet is a really great way to show up with the most confidence.
I love this idea of the superpowered strength. So how does knowing that you're really good at the like subscription-based marketing give you then the confidence to just be more assertive and, speak your mind in a boardroom or in a meeting?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to show up well when you're go into any context second guessing yourself, right? And so one of the things that I do is I make sure I'm over prepared. And I do think one of the keys to confidence is preparation. I had a boss tell me that, actually a woman I worked with at eBay, and everyone's like, oh, she's such an amazing speaker. I'm like, do you know why she's such an amazing speaker? Because she's rehearsed that speech probably 100 times before she went up in front of the entire company to give that talk. And so, I have learned that I do my best when I do the right amount of preparation. Now, you can't always rehearse a speech for 3 hours before you give it, but you need to rehearse it enough. Like, I never wing it. I find it really challenging to be confident when I'm just winging it. And so I prepare. I prepared for this conversation today. I wanted to know about your students. I looked at the website to see who are some of the other folks that spoke, and I watched a couple of their speeches to get a sense for how they presented. All of that is, my way of making sure that I show up in a way that's beneficial to the girls who joined us today, and also makes me feel confident that I'm going to do my best.
I love that. And thank you so much for putting in all this time to prepare to talk to us. I think it's been so incredible so far. And for the girls, please be typing any questions that you have into the Q&A box so that you can ask Ms. Findlay directly as well. But going back to what you said about how you still often have those moments of like, I don't belong here, and the voice just comes back in your head. How do you tell yourself like, no, that's wrong, I do belong here?
I think I'm lucky enough that I have enough data points of where I've done really well and what I need to do well. And I'll give you a great example. I was asked to do a talk last summer, and it was the next web conference, and it was one of those Zoom talks. And I find Zoom talks to be really challenging because I'm often talking to myself and I'm distracted by, is that what I look like? Is that what I sound like? It's a very weird context. And so I'm on this call with the moderator and the CMO of Pinterest, who I know, and I just felt like I was doing terribly. I don't know why. I felt like I was distracted by the visuals. And to the point where, the head of comms who partners with me, I said, please do not promote this on our Condé Nast channels. I don't want anyone to know I did it. And they sent me the video of the talk, and I didn't watch it for like 2 months. And then I watched the video and I'm like, oh, that was actually really good. And it was just this other reminder that we're our toughest critics. We are always judging ourselves more harshly than anyone else is judging. And I had prepared for that talk, just like I prepare for any other talk. So why was I getting in my head that I didn't do as well as I always do? And so it was a really good reminder that even when I think I'm having my worst day, I'm not. Like, I've done my homework. I'm showing up in a way that I should be proud of. And, over time, you get enough of those examples of thinking, like, oh, that wasn't so good. And then your boss is like, that was amazing. You killed that meeting. You're like, oh, I killed that meeting. Okay. And so those are the reminders. And oftentimes I'll think about, where are moments where I was really proud of how I performed and what did I do to get to that place, and make sure that I'm repeating some of those same practices.
Mm-hmm.
So works most of the time.
Absolutely. I think this idea of being your own toughest critic is really interesting and something that I've been thinking about as well. But it's often very hard to not be as harsh on yourself. So how do you practice that level of self-love and self-respect and just say it's okay to make a mistake sometimes?
It is okay to make a mistake. I actually think mistakes are very valuable. And I've made many mistakes across the course of my career. I think the key there is learning from those mistakes and changing, right? My biggest mistake my first year of business school is I didn't talk enough. And I would know the answer to a question, but I wouldn't say it out loud. And then someone else would say it. I'm like, oh man, I knew that, right? And in business school, where a lot of your grade is class participation, that mistake can cost you in terms of your grades. And I did fine in business school, but I could have done a lot better my first year if I had the confidence to speak more. And so, I think for me, it is back to preparation. It is back to trusting my gut and having the confidence to put myself out on a limb. And if you do that enough with success, you start to realize that, you know what, I actually know what I'm doing. And I think the moments where maybe it doesn't go as well as you would like, I actually do the same thing that I do with the moments where it went well. I reflect on, okay, what did you do? What should you have done differently? And how do you make sure that doesn't happen again? And so to your point, you learn from both. You learn from the successes and you learn from the failures, but the key is paying attention to both and making sure in those moments where you were not as polished as you wanted to be or didn't deliver to your standards, that you are taking the insights from that and moving forward. And that's really the best that you do. And then also there's confidence that comes with age, right? At this stage in my life, I'm just a lot more comfortable in my skin than I was when I was younger. And so the only thing I would say is trust your gut, girls. Like you are definitely, I think, better than you give yourself credit for. And just remember that.
That's very powerful. And looking back now at your life, what role would you say confidence has played in your success?
Oh man, I do think confidence is everything. It was funny. I was thinking about moments that proved that for me. And, I had this boss, one of my bosses when I was at Google, he's just like a nervous guy, right? And so whenever I did meetings with him, it would stress me out because his nervous energy would make me nervous and make me question myself. And I had all this self-doubt. And there was one meeting where it was a big meeting. I was presenting to the president of the I won't say what business because then you'll know what boss. I was presenting to the president of a business line at Google. And my boss couldn't show up. He had an accident. And so I did the meeting by myself, not a bad accident, but enough that he had to go take care of it. I ended up doing the meeting by myself and I nailed it. And I'm like, wow, what was different in this setting? What was different is I didn't have him in my head causing me to second guess every single thing that I said. So I was able to just do the meeting the way that I thought the meeting should be done. And I did a great job. And so I think about moments like that, and I just realize you should approach every meeting like that. Ignore that negative energy and who that other person is, and do what you believe is right. Because when you do that, that's often when you show up in the best light.
Absolutely. And I think you've touched on this throughout the talk with quite a few awesome golden nuggets, but is there any other sort of advice that you would give to young girls who want to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, I think for me, it's not following in my footsteps, right? It's really thinking about what good looks like for you, and charting a path to get there. And so I kind of knew I always wanted to be a CMO. Once I switched from finance into marketing, I knew that what I loved most about marketing was the breadth of the marketing experience, be it media or measurement, or you name it, I've touched it. I did telephone marketing, right? At one point, I could help write scripts for telemarketing. I've done it all, and I loved the breadth of it because that's what I found to be interesting. So I made decisions along the way to get myself exposure to all the different types of marketing, which means that sometimes it wasn't a linear path. I wasn't always going forward. When I left eBay, I had a team of like 90 people. To take a job at Google where I had a team of 7 people when I first got there. But that was a calculated decision to take a step back to do a role that I knew would ultimately give me the experience I needed to set me up for my end goal. And so I always tell people to think about what you're working towards, know what that North Star is, professionally and personally, and then think about all of the experiences that you need to accumulate along the way to get there, and chart your own course, right? It's really hard to follow truly in someone else's footsteps, but being really clear on what you're working towards is the best way forward.
That's a really great point, actually. And I think what you're saying about like knowing your own superpower strength and knowing what you're good at and sort of using that as a source of your confidence is also a great way to personalize that path and personalize the journey that you take yourself on.
Absolutely.
I'm seeing some really awesome questions in the Q&A box.
All
So
right.
I would love to open it up to the girls now. Why don't we start with a question from Nasri? Whenever you're on as a panelist, it would be great if you could turn on your mic and your video.
Yeah, hello. I'm Nasri Makhtal. I am from Minnesota, and my question was, you were kind of speaking to being a Black woman in like marginalized spaces, and so that kind of made me think of, do you feel the pressure to represent marginalized communities in spaces that are, I guess, don't represent the kind of identities you hold?
Yeah, so I used to feel the pressure, and now I've kind of flipped it, and now I see the opportunity, right? And what I get really excited about, because it used to feel like a burden, and when it feels like a burden, it's not fun, right? And sure, it's work, but I have a seat at the table. And I have this amazing opportunity to actually change thinking, change perceptions. And now I take advantage of that. And I think a great example was, what happened earlier this summer coming out of the death of George Floyd, and all of the Black Lives Matter movement, and companies everywhere were trying to figure out what they should do. And I had a seat as the only Black woman on the executive team at Condé Nast, as part of the dialogue on how we were going to show up for our employees who needed us in a very different way. And instead of shying away from my role as a Black woman, I really leaned into it. We did a town hall, and I helped to co-host the town hall along with our head of communications, with our CEO and our chief people officer. That's not something I had to do, but I felt like I should do, given I was someone who was immediately impacted by what was happening in the world. Another example of that is I had a lot of friends who were calling me to ask me what they should do. And these are women, often women, but not only women, but women and men in positions of power, CEOs, CMOs, presidents, COOs. I took every single phone call. And I shared the perspective on how it was for me, because a lot of times people think when you reach a certain level of success that racism doesn't impact you. It impacts me every single day. And me, my ability to be comfortable having these really vulnerable conversations was very helpful. And I was able to impact organizations that I'm not even a part of, just by being willing to have that conversation. So I try to flip the narrative. Instead of feeling like it's a burden, which I definitely did at one point, I do see it as a massive opportunity to be able to drive change.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
That's a great question, Natalie. Thank you. Just to add on to that, since you do so much around content and media creation, what have you noticed is the power of representation? I think that's a very relevant conversation that we're having these days.
It is a huge, huge, huge opportunity for us at Condé Nast. And it was one of the things that my team really leaned into when all of this was happening, because, we took a look at ourselves, to your point around feedback. We did some self-criticism and really identified opportunities where we could be doing better. We were talking about Bon Appetit earlier. Like, our content probably wasn't arguably as representative as it could be and should have been. So we revamped what we were doing on Bon Appetit. On certain brands, we were publishing great content in support of the Black Lives Matter movement that was behind a paywall. And we made the decision that we didn't want to make money on that content. We wanted to put it out there so that everyone could get educated and understand what was happening. And that was a business decision that we took to do what was right for society, putting people ahead of profits, which I thought was really, really meaningful. And so, I think the other piece is, I talked about understanding the consumer. So one of the teams that I am responsible for is called audience development. And that team is analyzing every day who our customers are, what content they're looking at, how much time they're spending on our site, and the demographics of those customers. And we're using that to feed editorial so that they know what content to produce, because that's the content our customers need. But if you think about that, it can be very self-fulfilling. Like, if you're only addressing the content that your current consumers want and need, you may be missing out on diverse audiences that don't currently come to some of our Condé Nast brands. And so we also made a decision to really branch out and think about what are audiences that we're not currently serving today that we should be. So I'm really proud of how we've evolved as a team to make sure that our content is a lot more diverse and representative of the world around us.
Absolutely. And I mean, even something like removing a paywall seems like a small step, but that's something that you don't see very often, of people like prioritizing humanity over conflict. So that's really incredible. Why don't we go with Sophie's question next? So Sophie, once you're on, if you could turn on your video and your audio, that would be great.
Hi, I think you kind of briefed over my question, but I was wondering what kinds of advice would you give to people our age to explore jobs like marketing and to see what they're kind of passionate about?
Yeah, no, I think it's really important to explore. I did a lot of internships when I was younger because I wasn't sure what I want. Everyone says, when I was little, well, after I decided I wanted to be a ballerina, I said I wanted to be a doctor because that seems to be right. Oh, a doctor or a lawyer, but I really didn't know what that meant, and I didn't know what else was out there. And so right before high school, my mom suggested I join an internship program that was rotational and give me exposure to lots of different jobs. And that was the best thing I ever did. And I'm naturally curious, so I asked a ton of questions. And so I think that's the most important thing that you can do whenever you meet someone that's interesting. Like, ask them what they do. Ask them what they love about it. Ask them if they have any regrets. I think it's critical to do that. And even with all that exploration, I still took a job out of college that ended up not being the right fit for me. I took the job that I thought I should do, which was a job in finance, which was really stable. And I did really well in math. And so I'm very analytical. So I obviously should be in finance. Well, I went into finance, and while I liked the analytics side of it and the analytical side of it, I missed creativity. I'd forgotten the fact that I had taken a ton of art and art history classes at Williams and really enjoyed those classes. And so it took me going to business school and doing my next wave of exploration, talking to folks that I went to business school with, hearing about the jobs that they had before business school, what they liked and didn't like, what they were thinking about doing after business school, and then taking an internship. I took an internship at Pepsi when I decided that marketing was probably where I wanted to go. And I worked with the woman who hired me to build an internship that would give me the most exposure to all the different types of marketing roles at Pepsi. That really opened my eyes to the fact that marketing is both very analytical, which is I love, but also really creative, which I also love, and which ultimately led me to where I am right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sophie. To build on that, it seems like in these moments you've described about, customizing your internship or participating in these programs, you've really been taking charge with what you want to do and sort of with your future. How do you do that? And how do you always sort of make sure that you're doing what you want as opposed to conforming to what society or others are expecting of you?
Yeah, I would love to say that it was easy. I do think, a big part of it comes from my parents. Like my parents from a very young age said, your job is to do really well in school so that you can have a successful life, right? And I think the result of that was I felt really responsible to not disappoint them and to be the best version of myself that I could be for my parents, which led me to just be hard charging in every single thing that I did. And so, ultimately, I think it started with my parents, but then it very much just became a big part of who I am. I talked about being curious before. I'm really curious. I'm always asking questions. I don't take anything at face value. When given an opportunity, especially a big opportunity, I want to make sure, especially as a Black woman, right? Because, a lot of times women, right, in general, but also women of color, are not given the same benefit of the doubt as men. So I always felt like I had more to prove and I had to work harder, be better. So I've always been hard charging and inquisitive, and that's basically followed me from everything that I've done. But there are times where you need to step back and say, am I fighting for the right things, right? Do I want that job because I really want that job, or do I want that job just because I want to prove that I can get it? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that you need to think about, which is why I think that self-reflection is also really important, because people who are type A and really driven need to make sure that if you're going to do the fight, you're fighting for ultimately the thing that's going to make you the most happy, as well as, if success is your criteria, also successful.
That's really great perspective. Why don't we go to Shayla for the next question? I related so hard to what you were saying about wanting to switch jobs. When I was in 5th grade, I wanted to be a water polo player, a swimmer, a baker, all within the span of 2 months.
Oh yeah. I did ballet from the age of 5. So I was like, of course I'm going to be a ballerina. I'm 5'3" and I did not have a ballerina's physique. So probably never going to happen. Hi, Shayla.
Hi there. So my question was about, so earlier you were talking about the superpowers or strengths that we all have. And I was wondering if you had any advice for how we can all go about finding our own.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a combination of what are the things that you've done that you are just really good at, right? And you can't, there's no argument, I'm just naturally good at this, or I've worked at it hard enough that I'm really good at it. But I also think it's also a combination of what you're good at, but also what brings you joy. Because there are lots of things that I'm good at that actually don't bring me joy, which ultimately means that eventually I'm not going to be as good at it as I could have been. And so I do think that combination is really powerful. And I've known for a long time that I'm super analytical, but banking was not the right career for me. But something that allows me to use my math skills and my analytical skills, but is a little bit more creative, ended up being where my superpower lies. And so some of it is trial and error. You got to try some things and figure out what you're good at and what brings you joy and the path you want to take, given where your strengths are. Awesome. I turned down a lot of jobs, because people are you're great at this, we want you for this. But then I think about it, I'm it might be, good given my superpower, but it's not the right next step for me. And so I think it's superpower plus there's there's something else. It's tied to passion. And it's hard to give you a formula, but I do think it's that combination.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Shayla. Why don't we ask Angelina's question next? So yeah, whenever you're on, if you could just turn on your video and your audio, that'd be great.
There she is.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. I'm from Los Altos, which is in the South Bay of the Bay Area. And so my question is, you mentioned a lot about confidence in business school and in the workplace. And I was wondering how that has applied to situations like where a lot more complex, like with other people and conflicts between like other team members or your boss and stuff like that. Yeah.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding the question. So how do I still be confident in environments of conflict?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would love to say that I've always been good at that. I definitely have not been. I think it's really hard when you are, especially in a context where the person has situational power. So more senior, more whatever. It is tough. And I think it wasn't until probably the last 5-7 years in my career that I just felt comfortable enough in my own skin to be willing to go toe to toe. And I think the advice I would give you guys is remember there's a reason you're in the room, right? It's really easy to forget and focus on what you think you're not good at, or he's more senior than me, or she's worked longer than I have. None of that matters. You wouldn't be in the room if they didn't think you had something to bring to the table. And I learned that lesson when I went to Google. I was fascinated at Google. It was really interesting for me, especially starting my career in finance, which is really hierarchical, right? And so, you always defer to the person who's more senior than you. That's just the way it was. And I would have these like kids, at the time, I was probably like in my late 30s when I went to Google, and it would be like 24-year-olds just out of college telling me that I was wrong. And I'm like, okay, well, let's hear more about why I'm wrong. But it was really interesting because they didn't care less that I had been working for 15, 20 more years. They had a belief and they shared their belief. And I think that that's really important. And it's frankly a lesson I probably took from my Google career. Like if these, post-college kids can be so confident and have strength in their convictions and back it up with data, right? To get me, and sometimes I would change my mind based on what they told me. It really made me think, gosh, I should have even more of that confidence in dealing with tricky situations with people who perceivingly had more power than me. It doesn't matter. And so just remembering there's a reason why you're in the room, I think is really important. And then also delivering it with respect, because I think a lot of it is in the how. I talk a lot about it's not just the what you do, it's the how you do it. And when I lead teams, I do not reward bad behavior. I don't care how good you are. If your behavior is poor, you're not going to do well on my team. So I think that combination of confidence, but also respect is important.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, Angelina. And I want to be mindful of your time, Ms. Findlay. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story. It's honestly incredible to just hear about your journey and see how you've always been pulling yourself up and empowering yourself. I'm really touched.
I had so much fun joining you guys today. Thank you so much for the amazing questions. I am inspired, frankly. So thanks so much, and good luck to all of you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.